discuss measuring the benefits of economic corridor development, we have here with us Professor John Wise, Emeritus Professor of Development Economics at the University of Bradford. Having retired in 2014 as Acting Dean of the then School of Social and International Studies, he has written extensively on issues of cost-benefit analysis, industrialization, and industrial policy, publishing several textbooks, including Project Analysis in Developing Countries, Industry in Developing Countries, and The Economics of Industrial Development. A third edition of Project Analysis in Developing Countries is to be published in October of 2023. He is the joint editor of the Routledge Handbook on Industry and Development. He has worked with the United Nations Industrial Organization over many years. He has been a reviewer for 4 UNIDO Industrial Development Reports and Economics, editor for other studies. He has worked with the Asian Development Bank for many years, both as a consultant and a staff member. From 2001 to 2006, he was the director of research at the ADB Institute in Tokyo. Since leaving the university, he has continued to advise ADB on issues of project analysis. He was lead consultant on the revision of the ADB guidelines for economic analysis of projects in 2017 and has recently worked on a draft handbook for the economic analysis of regional cooperation projects. He reviews project reports, provides advice on methodology, and delivers training programs for bank staff and government officials on an economic analysis of projects. Professor, the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon. I apologize that was such a long introduction. I mean, we've already run into some of the time. The key point to take out from that is the reason I'm here is that I was asked earlier this year to update some guidelines on the economic analysis of sub-regional projects. And regional cooperation projects is the terminology now, I think. I mean, this is an updating of work I did for the bank in 2017, published in 2018. If Chris McCormack is still switched on, maybe he'll remember a conversation where he tried to persuade me to get involved in this subject. I was a little bit reluctant at the beginning because, for reasons we can discuss, it's difficult and so on. But anyway, that's why I'm here, and later on in this session, I'll be contributing to the presentation based on the draft that's available for those guidelines. I should point out at this point that this session, not just my contribution, this session has a different flavor to the earlier sessions, which were very much about experiences with different programs. I mean, this session is rather more focused on techniques because its theme is attempts within ADB to come up with measures of the impact of regional cooperation. I mean, as you know, regional cooperation is one of the objectives of the bank, and not unnaturally, they want to find ways of measuring it. So this makes this session a bit of an outlier from the previous sessions. But I mean, I guess in defense, I'd point out that this session is about projects. And as has been pointed out on the first day, if you have a economic corridor project, ultimately that will create a series of subcomponents or projects that organizations like ADB or the China Infrastructure Investment Bank and so on, they will be interested in taking up. So not unnaturally, the question is, can we measure the benefits from these projects in the same way as we think we can measure the benefits from more conventional national projects. And it's also important because, as was pointed out, and Pradeep made it very clear in his opening remarks, economic corridor development is not a solution for all economic development problems. It's not, to use his expression, a magic bullet. And success depends on a series of complicated factors. And we saw this morning a very long list of prerequisites, the things you need for successful collaboration in this area. So it's a warning that there's no guarantee that a economic corridor project and the components that spin off from that they make sense from the point of view of either an individual economy or from the point of view of the region. We need some way of testing that. And at the moment, the type of economic calculation, project analysis calculation that is conventionally done provides one way of doing that. And I'll say a bit more about that later on. So there are two sessions and one contribution from a discussant. The first session by Mr. Rolando Avendaro from the bank looks at the measure of RCI collaboration, the RCI index that ADB has developed. And the second session, delivered by my collaborator Rowena Cham and myself, will focus on the approach to the economic analysis of these regional collaboration projects. So this has been a fairly lengthy introduction, and I'd like to give the floor to Rolando. I hope he's online, and we're waiting to hear his contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Weiss, and thank you for the introduction. May I just confirm you can see my presentation?
Yes, Rolando.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for the invitation to join this discussion. And as Professor Weiss mentioned, this is a slightly different session. In the 5-6 minutes I would like to present some of the developments on the indicator that ADB has developed, the RCI index, and also connect a little bit with the discussion more from the measurement perspective, and to present also some perhaps avenues for future work. So perhaps the first question that we had to answer, and that came at the very origins of this index, was what was the need to have a high level RCI index that is slightly different, as we will see, to the type of indicators that are used in the economic analysis of RCI projects. So there were several motivations. Some of them are described here, from planning to policy reform, and to have some instrument for better do the planning and budgeting process, and also to track performance and some of the spillovers that RCI and cooperation in general may have. Second, as an instrument for benchmarking, so to see progress and in economic integration, and also to compare different dimensions, as we have seen over the last 2 days, the multidimensional aspects that are also part of economic corridor development are important when considering progress in the RCI. And maybe a third dimension, a third aspect, was because of the changing needs, and not only on what it means regional cooperation, but also on what are the needs today in terms of measurement. And this goes from, for example, developing new indicators in areas such as energy or services trade, or climate change, and, for example, the carbon content of trade. So these are three motivations that are behind the development of this index. So some of you may be familiar with the index. So very briefly, the RC framework basically captures 8 dimensions of regional cooperation and is a composite and multidimensional index trying to share progress in these areas. This was introduced by ADB in 2017, and its purpose was, as it was mentioned, to offer standardized measures of regional cooperation for Asia-Pacific and for other regions as well. So just to present the latest results that we have from the RG, these are perhaps the 3 key charts. On the left-hand side, what we see is that over the last 15 years, RCI has shown progress, and more importantly, it was relatively stable during the pandemic between 2019 and 2021, with a very slight decline during this period. And we see also major improvements in areas such as technology and digital connectivity and infrastructure. On the middle chart, this is a regional comparison of how Asia Pacific stands in comparison to the rest of the world. And what we see is that there are some strengths in terms of Asia performing well in areas such as value chain participation, and as I mentioned, the digital connectivity, and also areas where it lags behind or there is room for improvement, such as financial integration and environmental cooperation. And on the right-hand chart, what we show here is the intra-subregional integration. So this is basically capturing the intra-subregional linkages within members of a subregional initiative. And what we see is a very divergent performance across initiatives, with some strengths and also areas for improvement in this is for the 3 main subregional initiatives. So this is kind of the how or where the region stands in terms of intra-regional and intra-subregional integration. But there is a lot of information behind in this index that we try to work on, and also to present to our ADB colleagues, and also try to corroborate if the index is presenting useful information. Here we see, for example, what are the drivers in terms of what are the main contributors to the RCI index, both by region and by subregion. To mention the chart on the right, for example, we see that the contributions tend to be relatively similar, and there is an important role for the regional value chain and the institutional arrangements, which is an important dimension, and maybe I can mention a couple of things later on this dimension. So what this index can be useful also is to understand how each of these dimensions is contributing. Of course, it's an imperfect index, but at least provides some sort of benchmark in terms of how the region or the subregional initiatives stand and what are the areas for improvement. Something that we are working on at the moment also is on the subregional program. So they are crucial, as we have seen over the past couple of days on ADB's support to regional cooperation. And also we would like to better understand not only the drivers or the dimensions, but also what are the types of engagement. Here, what we see is just a plot of what is the intra-subregional, so the cooperation within members of the same subregional initiative, and the cooperation with the rest of Asia, so the inter-subregional. And what we see is also that there are quite different trajectories this is for the 3 main initiatives, with in CAREC, for example, very similar progress in both intra and inter-subregional, whereas in GMS, the linkages within GMS members have been really driving progress in the subregional initiative. And in SASEC, it's more the inter-subregional linkages. So this is kind of the information that this index can provide, and allows to follow and to understand a bit better what are the dynamics. It's a high-level index, and one question that was interesting for us, especially for the discussion today, was can these high-level indicators, and by high-level I mean national-level indicators, capture some of the RCI spillovers? As we will see in the presentation by Professor Weiss, there are methodologies to assess the economic impact of economic corridors, and they look at different channels. And these include some of the channels that you see on the left, from technology transfer to improve transport, agglomeration effects, economies of scale. In principle, these spillovers should be reflected in the high-level indicators that are guiding RCI policy. But it is challenging to translate how this can contribute to each of these aspects. There is also issues on the attribution, for example, how important is one project or one economic corridor, for example, to a specific dimension. And understanding how they contribute to these broader outcomes is still an open question. We plot here some of the indicators that we think reflect better some of these potential spillovers in the case of the economic corridor development. I didn't mention much about the indicators, but some of the indicators that are behind the RCI, they aim to complement the assessment that is done at a more granular level on the economic corridor assessment. And here are some of the examples. These are, for example, on the infrastructure and connectivity dimension, where you have information on liner shipping, or ESCAP's very granular indicator on trade costs, which is a bilateral indicator, or even indicators of intra-subregional good exports. So they all provide information at the national level, and what we need to think is how they can be related to the indicators that will be presented in the next session, that are more at the project level. Three lessons that we have seen using these high-level indicators is, and this is not surprising, the importance of geographic location and how geography affects economy's ability to forge linkages. And this is very clear when we look at the value or the estimates of the RG, considering the spatial effect or without the spatial effect. Second, the network effects that we have been talking about also yesterday was mentioned, how regional integration is influenced by neighbors. What we find that is interesting also is that the channels can vary among the different clusters in Asia. So this influence is not necessarily also always driven by the same dimensions. And third, in terms of emerging trends, there is multiple aspects that need to be considered: the reorganization of supply chains and the harmonization of regulatory frameworks that we have been discussing, that are still very, very relevant for the next phase of RCI in the region. One final element is on the impact, how to understand the impact of global integration, regional integration on development outcomes. Something that we have increasingly been interested is also to look at the extra-regional linkages of the region and how they impact different outcomes in terms of economic growth or inclusive growth or inequality. And this is something that we think it's important even in the context of economic corridors, because as we have seen, there are some dimensions, for example, on the alignment with the value chains developments that are outside of the region, and they need to be considered in assessing this impact. So here we present some of the work that has been done, trying to estimate what is the impact of both global and regional integration on these areas of growth, inequality, or inclusive growth. And this could be expanded possibly to a more granular areas, such as sectoral productivity or more relevant areas in the context of economic corridors. So just to summarize my main points, first, standardized measures of RCI for different economies and dimensions, they can strengthen the RCI strategies, and this is important to explain the motivation of having such index. Second, these metrics can inform the rationale and sometimes also support the assumptions and robustness, especially in some of the economic analysis of RCI projects. But at the same time, a lot of the project level indicators, they capture important spillovers that are part of the RCI initiatives, especially at the subregional level. So this is something that needs to be considered also when presenting or when using this type of indicators to monitor progress at the national level. And fourth, as I mentioned, the extra-regional linkages that are increasingly relevant to explain the dynamics of RCI and how to ensure that they are aligned with the economic corridor objectives. So as a way forward, something that we are looking at is as they incrementally adopting this type of granular indicators coming from economic analysis or from other more granular databases in the customization to better reflect the progress in RCI and the synergies among some of these dimensions. And one example of this is between the institutional arrangements and the trade dimension. Thank you. I'll stop here and over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. There's a lot of technical information in the index, and maybe it's not quite intuitively clear how it's measured, but the basic result shows that the Asia Pacific region is the most integrated apart from the European Union area, which is obviously what one would expect. And as you'll have gathered, the higher the score on the index, the greater the level of integration, and the comparison is between the region and the global average, as I understand it. Just one specific comment I didn't quite follow, and maybe that could be clarified. One of the latter slides looked at the contribution of global integration to various dimensions of economic performance, and there's a reference to inclusive growth there. And I didn't, maybe I've missed it, but I didn't see where that's measured by a blue dot, and I didn't see the blue dot in relation to the Asia Pacific region. Whereas in Latin America, it appears from that information that the impact of inclusive growth impact of regional integration on inclusive growth was relatively strong and positive. So people always talk about Latin America as a very unequal region. So I didn't quite follow that result. I don't know if you'd be able to comment on that.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Yeah, the slide was showing the impact of global integration on those three dimensions. So basically, based on this composite index we have two components: the regional integration and the global integration. And the chart was showing the impacts across regions. The main message of this is that in general, both global economic integration and regional economic integration tend to have a positive impact. I mean, of course, it's difficult to have an causal effect, but it is associated with higher economic growth, but also, especially for global integration, with higher inequality. So the circle I think you were referring to, it was for Latin America is non-significant, but it is in general global integration tends to be associated to higher income inequality for most of the regions, including Asia and the Pacific. So this is kind of a standard result. What is interesting is that regional economic integration is not necessarily associated to this higher income inequality. So that's kind of the complement between how global and regional integration can contribute to these effects. And finally, on the inclusive growth, this is kind of it puts together a measure of growth, but taking into account adjusted for income inequality, and it tends to be also not significant both on the global and the regional integration index. So this exercise, what it shows basically is that there are different impacts by having higher regional linkages than by higher global linkages. In general, global integration tends to be associated to higher income inequality, and this is not the case for regional integration.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification. As I said at the beginning, this is a rather technical subject. I don't know if there are any other queries people want to raise at this stage. We could come back to some of the general implications of this at the end. Well, if not, perhaps we can pass on to the second session. Let me just say, as a way of introduction, that the terms of reference for the study that Wenna and I will be talking about was to assess how the standard ADB guidelines for the economic analysis projects, how these need to be adapted to projects that have regional benefits, regional spillovers. And the original 2017 guidelines, of course, are written from a national perspective. And that's why there's a need to ask the question, well, how far can we go in terms of adding regional effects onto this? And there are various problems in doing this exercise, partly for those interested in the economic theory of this. The standard methodology of project analysis is what the textbooks call a partial equilibrium approach, which is, in effect, assumes the project is relatively small relative to the rest of the economy. And of course, some of the corridor development projects, or indeed some of the other types of regional project, well, may not be small. They may be big projects in small countries, for example. So that always poses a problem. And I should stress also that the presentation will be focusing on general types of project with a regional dimension, not necessarily what you've been calling ECD, Economic Corridor Development, which can be seen as a subset of the general category of projects which create regional benefits. So with those caveats in mind, let me turn to Wenna to sort of start us off.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. So thank you, John, for giving a snapshot of a background of our presentation. So for this session, I would the outline of our presentation would be in 3 parts. Next slide, please. Sorry. Yes. Can we move to the next slide? Hello. Thank you. Okay. Sorry. So our outline of our presentation would be in 3 parts. So first, I would be giving an overview of the economic analysis and how it is being done in ADB. The second part is actually the main bulk of the presentation, which is focusing on the economic analysis of RCI projects, which is the ADB projects, as John mentioned earlier. So ADB has a definition of the RCI projects, and from there we've decided to actually extend the 2017 guidelines that were prepared to focus on how to do RCI projects, because we wanted to also include the regional benefits for these RCI projects. And as mentioned also earlier, so for these types of projects, there would be second or third round effects. So we call them the wider economic benefits. And we will be presenting in a couple of slides on how it can complement the economic analysis done for these types of projects. And then, of course, lastly, our last slide would be on the conclusion. Next slide, please. So what is economic analysis? So usually, so when we hear the term, it usually refers to the evaluation of the costs and benefits to check the viability of a project or an investment opportunity. So in layman's term, it involves the identification, the evaluation, and the comparison of cost and benefits. So you could see here that when you have projects, you need to assess what is the contribution of such project in an economy. So how do you do that? It requires the estimation. So you need to quantify these costs and benefits over the project life. So when we do economic analysis, we have an assumption on the project life. Usually for infrastructure projects, we would usually assume on average 25 to 35 years of our project life. And you would see here the benefits and the costs of the project over the project life. So the benefits and costs should capture the impact to the economy. And as you all know, the impacts in the future would have lower value than the same effect in the present due to the cost of waiting. So we usually address this by doing the discounting. Next slide, please. So what is economic analysis? So as defined, so you have all our projects would create either costs or benefits for an economy. So we do the quantification and compare. So this is how we do it. We identify the costs, we identify the benefits, and we compare this over the project life. So obviously, when the project's benefit would exceed the cost, then it would be for the country's benefit and it would contribute to the country's development. So economic analysis is a technique. So it's a methodology that is used to for this purpose to separate projects that are acceptable from projects that governments, for example, would not undertake. In ADB, economic analysis is a means to help bring about better allocation of resources and can lead to an enhanced income for a country. It supports the development objective of a country. And usually it is best undertaken, economic analysis should be undertaken at the early stage of the project cycle. Next slide, please. So why do we do economic analysis? So for ADB, we do economic analysis because it's mandated in the ADB charter. So in the ADB charter, it clearly says here that for all projects that the bank or investment decisions on all loans made, guaranteed, or participated in by ADB should be based on economic and efficiency considerations. So it is a requirement for all projects of ADB, whether it be financed by loans or grants, and are being guaranteed by the bank. So it's being done for both sovereign and non-sovereign operations. So economic analysis is required. When we say it's part of the due diligence requirement, it means that there is a separate document that would detail the analysis that has been undertaken and presents the results of the analysis. So this is required for all ADB projects. So we call it the economic analysis link document. And it provides the information and also the calculations, because we need to quantify for investment projects. We usually do a quantification of the benefits for this project. So well, there's a difference when we do economic analysis with the financial analysis, because economic analysis is the economic benefits are different from what financial analysis considers, because usually financial analysis only focus on the revenue. But for economic analysis, as you would see later when we discuss the types of projects and the types of benefits, you would see that the benefits would be different from financial analysis. Next slide, please. So here are the 10 key areas of economic analysis in ADB. So you would see this, all these subsections in the economic analysis link document. When we do economic analysis, this should all be contained there. So the first is a country context analysis. So all projects that ATB does are part of the development, objective development plan of an ADB DMC. So it should be in line. Should it be in line with the development objectives? And of course, it's also part of ADB's country partnership strategy. So, as an initial introduction for projects, how projects are being considered or selected, there should be discussion on the country context analysis. The second area is on the sector analysis. So what are the constraints that this project is trying to address? So there should be a discussion in the document on how this project will hope to address the constraints that have been identified in a particular sector for that matter. The third is identifying rationale for public intervention. So why should government intervene? Why what's the market failure? Why is the private sector not providing that good or service, and government needs to actually use its resources or seek support from international financial institution to be able to undertake the project? So there should be some clear rationale for the public intervention in the analysis. The fourth, and I think one of the more important element or area in economic analysis, is the demand analysis, because this would actually determine how you would be able to project, the benefits of the project. So a good demand analysis is required. So you would know. So we actually include conduct of willingness to pay survey, etc., so that we would know, what is really the demand for the project. And this help establish the need for the project and the design, the scale of the project. Alternative analysis is one of the key areas that of economic analysis, because it also describes what are the alternative or the other options to be able to address a certain develop or constraint in the sector for that matter. So there's some discussion on the alternative analysis. You can also do these costs in terms of probably the design and trying to determine which is the best option for undertaking a project. The sixth item, which is the cost-benefit analysis, this is the most common approach when we do economic analysis, and you would see this in most of our investment projects. So you do a cost-benefit analysis, as mentioned earlier. So you have the cost and you have the benefits, and you need to compare this over the project's life and determine. So there would be a result when you do the cost-benefit analysis, and based on the results, you would help decision makers in terms of whether to pursue the project or not. The seventh key area would be on sustainability analysis. This is an important part of economic analysis because you want to make sure that the project would be able to deliver over the project life, the envisioned benefits of the project. So we try to test what are the key parameters that can actually affect the results of the analysis undertaken for a particular project. So you need to identify these key parameters so that you will be able yeah, in the event that certain things would actually have impact on the project and project's envisioned benefits. So the eighth parameter would be on the sensitivity and risk analysis. We do risk analysis for large projects because this involves, as earlier, it's kind of technical also. So for smaller projects, we don't actually recommend anymore for the conduct of risk analysis. Conduct of distribution analysis, because if projects are actually focused on addressing poverty or income inequality, so if this is the main objective of projects, distribution analysis would provide information on how the benefits will be shared among the different stakeholders of the project. So you would see here, we would calculate the poverty impact ratio. We would see that, who are the poor for the project, and are these poor really are the intended beneficiaries for the project. And the last is the design and monitoring framework. This is being done earlier on at the project concept stage, to be able to actually link how the projects would the outputs of the project would contribute to the intended outcome, and of course the development impact of the project. So these key areas are the usual elements of economic analysis in ADP. And similarly, later on, when Professor Weiss would discuss how economic analysis would be done for RCI projects, it would still follow these key areas. Next slide, please. So key procedures and decision criteria. I guess, based on the key areas, what is important here is the quantification and the valuation of the effects of the project over the project's life. So, but this quantification and valuation would depend on a lot of assumptions, and these assumptions would actually emanate from implementing agency, the executing agency, and also doing a demand analysis for the project. So once you have all this information, once you have the assumptions clear, updated, for example, for road projects, updated traffic, then you would be able to do the quantification and the valuation. So as noted here, the effects in each year must be converted to a common base year. So we have, like, for projects that we are appraising for 2023, we need to appraise that in 2023 prices. We don't want to use 2022 prices or 2021 price, because it doesn't give you the, what is the current situation in the economy. And finally, as discussed earlier, because project effects in the future would have a different valuation, so we use discounting of the benefits and costs, and we do this present value. So decision criteria, I think this is important for decision makers, which is one of the more common methodology of economic analysis. You will be able to see the results, and both in the economic net present value, which is the absolute sum. So, and then on the economic internal rate of return, which gives you the percentage return of the project. So ideally, if the net present value is greater than 0, then, and that it means that the EIRR, so the economic internal rate of return, is higher than the discount rate. For ADB's purpose, and based on the 2017 guidelines, we use a 9% for our investment projects. We have a leeway to go down to 6% for projects that in the social sector or in the environment sector, where benefits are harder to actually quantify. So depending on countries, for example, for the Philippines, they use a 10% discount rate. So if your project is greater than 10%, so that project is, we call it economically viable. So their economic net present value is greater than 0. Next slide, please. So for the EA guidelines, so economic analysis guidelines for RCI project, this emanated as discussed earlier by Professor Weiss, is based on the 2017 guidelines, which is our 2017 guidelines is for, it covers and hopefully we would be able to publish this and put it up in the ADB website, hopefully by the end of this year. So the first stage for RCI projects, and it's being done by our colleagues in the RCI thematic group, which is our current host. They establish the case for RCI project based on the scorecard. So they follow a certain guideline. So there's a scorecard that whether if this is like really an RCI project or not. And the second stage is actually to do the economic analysis. Now do the quantification of the benefits and the cost, and determine whether if this project, what proportion would be like the national benefits and what proportion would have this RCI benefits. So and as defined here, you have it should create benefits in countries other than the country's project location. So it should not be so the RCI benefits are over and above the benefits of from the where the project is being undertaken. So
Have we lost Wenna? Oh. Connectivity is failing, is it, in this instance? No? Okay, well, I can
move to the next.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh, we lost you temporarily,
okay,
Wenna.
so yeah, I think the bandwidth, yeah, it says here the bandwidth is low. So maybe
Okay,
John,
well, please press on.
Yeah, okay.
Please.
Yes, okay. So expected benefits of RCI project in general. So most of these are the usual projects that ADB what we've been ADB supporting. So greater connectivity through cross-border transport like road corridors, and we also support trade facilitation type of projects. So it's the standards, harmonization, the customs, border control posts. We support those types of projects. And then just recently during the COVID pandemic, we also do collaborations of control of infectious diseases, not only for human but also for livestock or the other those that would have impact on livelihoods also in the cross-border thing. So we do that. So, and provision of basic services, so regional power. So we've had projects where it supports also the export, development of power plants, and then exporting this power to countries, neighboring countries, which provides additional income for the power producing country. And then development of human capital is also something that ADB supports in education and TVET. So those are the types of RCI projects that ADB has funded in the past. So in terms of valuation, I guess we still use how we value projects in different types of sector. So next slide, please. So for transport projects, so usually we would have this we find this corridor projects where they ADB supports how many kilometers of road to connect to countries in Central Asia. So the main benefit for these types of for road transport projects would be the road user savings. So we calculate vehicle operating costs and time savings, plus of course freight related savings because for delays in cargo and the value of the cargo also. For trade facilitation types of project, so we as part of the benefits, we try to calculate the increase in the trade value added of these projects. So that would be the main benefit of the project. So as much as possible, we would want to have to gather the data information from the country, so that you can actually have a better picture, and then project how the project will be able to support or increase trade. And for power projects, so usually it's either cost savings or for additional electricity service, then we use the willingness to pay. For projects in education or technical vocational education, we use incremental earnings as part of valuing the benefits. And lastly, for cross-border control of diseases, so we have averted costs as one of the main way to actually value the benefits. So in regional analysis, so this would, so you, based on the benefits, you need to allocate which of these benefits would go to the countries that would be affected or would have an impact for the project that's being implemented. Okay, so next slide. So here's stage one. I'll transfer. I'll move to. I'll let John, Professor Wife, take over. So he's also involved when the scorecard was actually prepared by the RCI thematic group. Thank you, John.
Okay, well, I'll take over from here. I should say that bear in mind that when we do economic analysis, we have to be aware that we're making approximate calculations about likely benefits and costs, approximate really in the very short term, and then we're projecting those into the future. So there's a considerable amount of uncertainty involved in all of these things. And adding a regional dimension, of course, by its nature, simply adds to that uncertainty. But the objective in this new dimension that we're introducing is to demonstrate that more than one country benefits from the investment activity. If we can show that, then we've provided the definition of an RCI project. So that's the objective, and it's a fairly limited one. Oh, I'm going back. Yeah. Okay. Now, the scorecard, is meant to identify the different potential regional effects of the type that we were just looking here. Road user savings, increase in value added through trade, cost savings, incremental earnings, whatever. Different mechanisms are possible. And the scorecard, the intention is that this sets out a narrative explaining what the expectation is. We then try to firm that up in an economic analysis calculation where we put numbers on these different effects. The economists who do project analysis are always looking for numbers. They want to be able to measure things, quantify and value costs and benefits. And what we want to calculate is both a national measure of what a project is worth, what we're calling here the national economic net present value or internal rate of return, and a further additional value, which is the value to the region as a whole. So it's that additional value that gives us what we're calling here a regional effect. And I'll give some simple illustrations in a moment. And if we've got a complex regional project where there's cost savings between countries, then we really want to know not just how the costs are allocated across countries, but also how the benefits are allocated, which of course is a further level of complication. And from a regional point of view, the regional economic net present value is then the sum of the net present values for all of the countries concerned. Now, we've got some examples which are in the draft of the handbook as it stands at the moment. One of which, of course, is a project from this part of the world, and then we've got a trade facilitation project and a power export project, and we've added education and the environment, though there are no project examples for there, just some benefit examples. So I'll run through these briefly, and when I talk about some of the technical side of this, I'm deliberately not going into too much detail. I'm giving a flavor of the argument, and if anybody wants to follow up, I can elaborate, or we can give references and so on. ADB has published quite a lot on this, by the way, so if people want to follow up, we can give you the website references. Now, most directly linked with your theme of economic corridor development are the valuation of transport projects. And of course, as was mentioned in the presentation by our colleague from the World Bank, the convention in transport project analysis is to look for the user benefits, which are typically measured in terms of cost savings, vehicle operating cost savings, and time savings. If you build a road, you reduce the costs of running vehicles and you save time, and so, or if you improve a road. And of course, there is the potential, and this is where people were talking the last 2 days about the effect of corridors and the inducement it creates and the linkage effects it creates. There's a potential for wider effects, which are primarily categorized in terms of productivity improvements and induced investment. And the regional dimension to this arises through the cross-border traffic involved and spillovers within the region. If there's additional investment in border countries, neighboring countries, this creates net benefits and so on and so forth. Now, technically, transport analysis uses this distinction between different types of traffic. We don't need to go too far into that if you're not transport specialists. The key from this aspect is to try and identify how much of these transport benefits go to other countries. And one way to do this, and I'm not going to go over these equations in too much detail, one way to do this is to introduce elasticities. This measure economists are very familiar with, the percentage change in a variable caused by the percentage change in another variable. And the key is the income elasticity for regional traffic flows. So if income is growing, what impact does this have on traffic flows within the region? And the other elasticity is a price elasticity for regional traffic. How does regional traffic change when the costs of travel between different countries changes? One way of doing this sort of calculation is to use these elasticity estimates. The more detailed project calculations might include those where you get the figures from, where you get the elasticities from. If you're lucky, you'll get a country-specific estimate. That's usually very unlikely. You'll have to refer to the wider literature and so on. So, for a project like this, border road improvement project, when the economic analysis was done by ADB, benefits were in terms of savings in VOCs, vehicle operating costs, and savings in travel time. Estimates were made of the additional traffic flowing through the effect of the economic activity that the project was assumed to stimulate. Then there were also benefits from induced investment in the mining sector, and in the agriculture sector. Now, there's a bit of, as part of the exercise for the handbook, I reviewed this report, and we don't need to go into the detail of it, but there was a risk of double counting. I mean, this is always a problem in this sort of exercise. How far the benefits from generated traffic are actually including benefits from extra agricultural production and extra mining activity. That's something you have to try and extract, so you don't count the same benefits twice. Now, through various manipulations, and this is really based on assumptions rather than detailed data, because we weren't doing the reappraisal of the project, we leave that to somebody else. On assumptions about the allocation of benefits, you get a, and this is the key point here, a regional net present value, which is just under $76 million, and a percentage return on that total investment of 18%. From a national point of view, it was estimated that there was a surplus or economic net present value of approximately 63 million. So the difference between the two is the regional spillover. Yeah. And that's derived by making a series of assumptions about how the basic project's benefits are allocated between countries. Oh, I'm going backwards. Yeah. Now, another project we've been talking about in the last 2 days, trade facilitation measures, often cited as an important aspect of this story. The starting point for economic analysis estimates the benefit from this type of activity in terms of time and cost savings for governments. Higher staff productivity at border crossings gives us the rationale for that, and time and some cost savings for the vehicle operators who move across the frontier. And we expect some spillover into terms of regional benefits because of the impact of lower transit time on cross-border trade, removal of procedures that delay goods at the port, and so on. Now, these procedures and the reduction in time, in theory, we can think of as an additional cost faced by exporters. And we're reducing that cost as a result of the project. So again, you can use this concept of inelasticity. How do imports into a country respond when the costs of moving, the trade costs involved, when these drop? And with assumptions about that, you can come up with higher import flows. And if you get the higher import flows, you've got an estimate of additional trade. The economic benefits of that, and this is a misrepresentation you sometimes see, the economic benefits of that are not the gross value of the exports, or the imports, not the quantity multiplied by the price. It's the increase in the value added component of trade. And of course, only a proportion of the value of trade will be value added. So that's what, in effect, we want to estimate as the regional benefit. Now, when you do this sort of calculation, the way I've been explaining it in terms of elasticities and so on, which is in line with sort of standard economic theory, when you do that, the impact on trade is likely to be small. Much more important will be where there is an inducement effect created by the additional investment on both sides of the border, which is stimulated by the reduction in trade costs. I mean, that's the key potential benefit. Whether it's realized or not depends on a whole series of things, that are affecting supply in the respective countries. And again, the danger in this sort of analysis is making unrealistic assumptions about how investment will respond. That can give you grossly distorted estimates of the trade effect and therefore the value added effect. And if you can't measure the inducement effect, the consequences of the additional investment, if you can't measure them, and sometimes, well, maybe possibly even always, it's difficult to put precise numbers on these effects. The argument that we use in the draft handbook is you should at least discuss them. There should be a qualitative discussion of the potential for specialization on both sides of the border. And now this should have been highlighted in the first stage of this analysis at the scorecard stage. This is a way of clarifying, elaborating that discussion. So in other words, you can't just assume these positive effects. You need to be able to come up with some explanation of why they're likely to occur. This is an example of a regional cooperation integration program project from China. Expansion of the Border Trade Service Center, designed to stimulate trade between China and Vietnam. The original economic analysis for this estimated incremental export value associated with the improvement in border trade services, giving a relatively high measure of the worth of the project, 426 million Chinese currency, a percentage return of 22%. When we looked at this for the handbook, I assumed that this was a gross value, and therefore the value added component is the true measure of economic benefit. You need to extract the costs of generating that additional trade. On the basis of this particular assumption, 40% of gross export value would be a net benefit. That gives us a revised internal rate of return, which is much lower, 8%. Power, we talked about power export projects. Well, again, you do an economic analysis calculation on those. I mean, I won't go into too much detail because we haven't talked about power projects very much in this session. But the key question is whether there is a consumer surplus involved in the importing country. That consumer surplus definition, the difference between people who are willing to pay for the power and what they actually pay. That's a gain to power consumers. Is there a consumer surplus in the importing country? If we're talking about the exporting country, the question is there a producer surplus? Are exporters getting significantly above the costs of production, including a normal rate of profit in that calculation? And under those conditions, we can identify a regional benefit. No, sorry, I'm getting this upside down. Yeah. I won't go into that in too much detail because time is passing, but this is a Bangladesh-India project. I mean, maybe because those countries are represented in the room, maybe it's worth spending a little bit of time on it. Transmission line, when the bank did the original appraisal, appraised from the national point of view, in other words, from the perspective of Bangladesh. And the benefits from to Bangladesh are the savings in cost and any additional willingness to pay for power. Gain to India is the difference between the export price they receive and the costs of supply. including a normal rate of profit. So if you just do the analysis from the national point of view, I'll just summarize the percentage returns. It's higher, 22%. Oh, 22% is the rate of return from a national point of view. If you add in the regional benefit to India, which is created by the fact that the power has been sold at a price which is significantly above the generation cost and transmission cost when they're added on, that gives a very high rate of return of 47%. So we're picking up the regional spillover to the exporting country, in this case, India. Yeah. Education, well, we haven't really talked about education. I won't say very much about this. The standard way of calculating benefits from education